The night air cut like glass as Karoline Leavitt stepped out of the courthouse, each breath trembling in the cold as a wall of cameras erupted in a blinding storm of white light. Reporters surged toward her in a chaotic wave, microphones stretching over shoulders and elbows as if the crowd itself were desperate to catch the sound of her unraveling. Her hands shook as she tried to steady a stack of documents against her chest, but even from a distance it was clear the papers were quivering harder than her voice. A reporter shouted her name, another pushed forward, and suddenly the question sliced through the noise: is the $80 million lawsuit real? Leavitt swallowed hard, her voice cracking as she tried to form a response, but what escaped was barely more than a whisper, a thin strand of sound swallowed instantly by the frenzy around her. All she managed to say was that she would address it soon, though even that statement wavered like it might collapse under its own weight. Flashes burst again, freezing her expression in jagged fragments: fear here, denial there, a rising panic she could no longer hide. Behind her, aides exchanged frantic glances, unsure whether to pull her away or let the spectacle burn itself out. But the crowd pressed closer, hungry for the fallout, hungry for the moment she would finally admit the truth no one expected to land with such explosive force. She closed her eyes for a beat too long, as though wishing for a world where the headline wasn't real, where her words hadn't detonated into something far bigger than she could contain. But the cameras kept rolling, and the lawsuit loomed over her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. And as she finally forced herself to step forward, the truth clung to the cold air between every flash and every gasp. This wasn't just a political stumble, it was a freefall. But the real story of how we got here starts long before this meltdown. Because what triggered this lawsuit wasn't just a comment, it was a political grenade no one saw coming. Now, with the courthouse doors closing behind her and the nation holding its breath, the question wasn't whether she could recover, but how far the shockwaves of that single moment would spread before the truth finally forced every hidden tension into the open. And the world felt it coming soon. 48 hours before the courthouse chaos, the world looked different though. In hindsight, the warning signs were everywhere. The political climate felt like dry grass in late summer, waiting for the spark that would turn everything into a wildfire. Commentators were already circling each other on cable panels. Influencers were trading barbs like currency, and social feeds felt less like conversations and more like battlegrounds where nobody walked away unscathed. And into that atmosphere stepped Karoline Leavitt, ready for another round in the endless arena of commentary wars. She had no idea she was about to unleash something far bigger than her usual nightly soundbite. It happened during a live-stream segment meant to be routine, fiery, sure, but typical for the cycle. The kind of thing her followers expected, the kind of thing her critics rolled their eyes at. But then she made that comment about Jasmine Crockett, a throwaway jab she assumed would be swallowed by the avalanche of daily outrage. Yet the second the words left her mouth, even she seemed to feel the air shift, like the room itself took a step back. There was a sudden, uneasy pause from her co-hosts. A flicker of discomfort in the live chat. But the moment passed, the broadcast moved on, and Leavitt, ever confident in her own reflexes, believed the ripple would fade before morning. It didn't. Within minutes, a clipped 10-second version of her remark hit Twitter, then TikTok, then Instagram Reels, each upload sharper, angrier, more deliberate. The comments spread like a spark landing in that dry political grass, igniting threads, replies, stitches, and quote tweets at a speed that defied logic. Supporters rushed to defend her, framing it as just heated commentary, while critics called it exactly the kind of rhetoric that exposed deeper fractures in American public life. The clash was instant and explosive, and every refresh of a feed made the numbers jump higher, views in the hundreds of thousands, then millions, then beyond. But it wasn't just the outrage cycle doing its usual orbit. This struck something older, deeper. People didn't hear a simple insult. They heard echoes of a long history of dismissiveness aimed at women of color in public life, echoes that communities recognized immediately because they had lived through them their entire lives. And when Jasmine Crockett became part of that firestorm, it wasn't because she sought attention, it was because millions saw in her a symbol of something that deserved protection. The argument stopped being about political teams and started being about identity, respect, and the line between commentary and harm. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Live streams popped up everywhere. Friends unfollowed each other. Estranged relatives resumed old fights. It felt like the whole country was sitting on the edge of a collective nerve, and this one moment pressed directly onto it. People weren't just reacting, they were remembering. The conversation became bigger than Leavitt's words and bigger than the live stream. It was about who gets dismissed, who gets targeted, and who gets to speak with dignity in a world where so many voices are told to shrink. And as the fury intensified, the political class took notice. Pundits dragged the clip into nightly monologues, strategists weighed the implications, journalists probed for deeper meaning. A week's worth of discourse was suddenly compressed into hours, and the nation felt the tremor of something shifting beneath the surface. But before the internet could even catch its breath, someone else was watching someone who was about to take this fight to an entirely different level. Jasmine Crockett's story didn't begin in the spotlight. It began in the quiet corners where most people never noticed the first sparks of a leader. She grew up watching communities fight to be heard, watching families navigate systems that seemed designed to overlook them. And from an early age, she understood that dignity wasn't something granted by power, it was something claimed by presence, persistence, and pride. Those early years shaped her like pressure shapes steel, giving her a calm resilience that didn't shout for attention yet commanded it all the same. While others learned to survive by shrinking themselves, Jasmine learned to stand taller, not out of defiance, but out of an unwavering belief that every person deserves to occupy space without apology. That belief became the foundation that would carry her through every room she entered, from classrooms to courtrooms to the national stage. Before anyone knew her name, Jasmine was already fighting battles most people never see. In college, she became the friend everyone turned to when life backed them into corners, the one whose voice steadied the room without overpowering it. Later, in law school, she stepped into the world of advocacy with a bone-deep certainty that justice wasn't abstract theory. It was lived experience, measured in whether everyday people felt protected or abandoned. When she graduated and began working with clients who had been silenced, overlooked, or dismissed, her reputation grew not because she sought recognition, but because she made people feel seen. Community leaders took notice. Parents thanked her. Elders called her a rising light. And while she never claimed the title of hero, communities began giving it to her, one quiet conversation at a time. Her rise to elected office wasn't born from ambition, but from pressure from neighbors who continually asked her to represent them, pressure from young people who said they needed someone who understood their reality, pressure from elders who recognized that Jasmine's calm was not silence but strength. When she finally stepped into public life, she carried with her the same grounded clarity that had defined every chapter before. She didn't trade her values for political theater. She didn't trade her compassion for headlines. Instead, she built a reputation for showing up prepared, speaking with intention, and choosing dignity even when others tried to drag her into the mud. Her voice never wavered, not because she lacked emotion, but because she never let emotion eclipse purpose. And that purpose, protecting people who had spent lifetimes unheard, became her compass. As her platform grew, so did her influence. Young activists looked to her as proof that leadership didn't require theatrics, just conviction. Immigrant families pointed to her during dinner-table conversations about who truly represented their values. Journalists noted her ability to cut through noise with a single measured statement, and opponents, though they rarely admitted it, often adjusted their tone when she stepped into the conversation. Jasmine had a way of reminding everyone that politics wasn't supposed to be a shouting match. It was supposed to be a service. And in a time when the loudest voices often drowned out the most thoughtful ones, her presence felt like a recalibration. She became the steady rhythm in a chaotic storm, the person who could restore balance simply by refusing to be pulled into pettiness. With each debate, each hearing, each community round table, her light reached further. Yet what made Jasmine remarkable wasn't just her skill, it was her philosophy. She believed that dignity mattered more than dominance, that listening mattered more than winning, and that serving people required the courage to stay grounded even when the world rewarded outrage instead. She refused to measure her worth by how many arguments she could spark. She measured it by how many people walked away feeling empowered. And in a political landscape overeager to elevate conflict, she became a quiet revolution. Her calm wasn't weakness. Her restraint wasn't passivity. They were choices, deliberate, disciplined, powerful choices that made her stand out in an era defined by clamor. And when storms formed around her, she never met them with panic. She met them with the unshakable certainty that truth doesn't need volume, it needs clarity. By the time the national spotlight shifted toward her, Jasmine had already learned how to carry herself with the grace of someone who knew exactly who she was and who she refused to become. She walked into interviews with the same steady cadence she brought to town halls, never rushing, never raising her voice, letting her ideas do the work. Her presence reassured people who felt exhausted by chaos and inspired those who long believed that strength could coexist with compassion. That growing belief, shared by millions across the country, turned her into something larger than a representative. She became a symbol of the America so many hoped to see: confident, inclusive, principled, and unwaveringly proud. Even her critics, though they searched for weaknesses to exploit, often found themselves tangled in the complexity of someone who wouldn't play the usual rhetorical games. Jasmine was redefining what leadership could look like at a moment when the country needed new models. And as her influence expanded, so did the expectations placed on her shoulders, creating a quiet tension beneath the admiration. But she never flinched. She prepared. When Leavitt's comments went viral, Jasmine didn't respond with anger. She responded with something more powerful and more dangerous to her opponent. The moment the clip of Leavitt's remark hit the digital bloodstream, the reaction was immediate and volcanic. It felt as though every commentary channel, every podcast, and every panel show had paused whatever they were doing to dissect the tone, the intent, and the deeper meaning beneath the words. Screens lit up with split panels of pundits defending, dismissing, or condemning what she'd said. One conservative host insisted it was nothing more than spirited criticism. A progressive commentator shot back, "Spirited criticism doesn't sound like that." Another voice chimed in with a weary sigh. "This isn't just about the comment, this is about a pattern of how certain people are spoken about in public life." Clips multiplied. Reaction videos layered commentary on top of the original moment, pausing and rewinding the 10-second flashpoint with the intensity of analysts breaking down a championship play. On TikTok, stitched videos formed a mosaic of responses. Young activists shaking their heads, community leaders explaining historical context, comedians reenacting the moment with exaggerated disbelief. Crowds outside community centers and college campuses gathered in impromptu discussions, phones held up to replay the clip for those who hadn't seen it yet. You could hear the murmur spreading. Did she really say that? Why would she go there? She knew exactly what she was doing. As the backlash mounted, Crockett's team released a single, carefully crafted statement. All options are being evaluated. No anger, no excess, no grandstanding, just a quiet assurance that dignity would not be brushed aside. That sentence alone shifted the room. Suddenly, the debate wasn't just about commentary, it became about accountability. A legal analyst on one late-night panel leaned forward and said, "If legal action is even on the table, this could escalate fast." Another replied, "It may not even be about winning a case, it may be about drawing a line." Leavitt, confronted with the swelling reaction, tried at first to brush it off with practiced bravado. She released a video saying, "People are overreacting. This is political correctness gone wild." Her tone was sharp, her gestures emphatic, her delivery brisk. The comments beneath the clip, however, told a more complicated story. Supporters praised her defiance, but critics called the response tone-deaf, dismissive, or evasive. A few wrote, "She looks more nervous than she sounds." Another said, "She's trying too hard to act unbothered." As hours passed, something in her posture began to shift. In a live interview later that night, the edges of composure frayed just enough for viewers to notice. When the host asked whether she regretted the remark, she stiffened and replied, "I didn't do anything wrong," but her voice carried a tremor she couldn't fully hide. A clip of that moment circulated quickly, with viewers isolating the hesitation and replaying it again and again. "She's rattled," one user wrote. "She knows this is different," another replied. Behind the scenes, rumors swirled across digital spaces that Crockett's team was consulting legal experts. Commentators speculated about what kind of action might follow. Some dismissed it as performative. Others insisted it could become one of the most consequential steps taken in response to a political remark in recent memory. And every hour that passed without a formal resolution seemed to ratchet the tension even higher. In-person crowds echoed the online energy. At public events, Leavitt faced pointed questions she struggled to deflect. Whispered conversations trailed her as she walked through hallways and across stages. People studied her reactions with the scrutiny of an audience watching a character approach a breaking point in a drama. Her smile grew tight, her answers shorter, her tone sharper. Aides hovering behind her looked less like strategists and more like people waiting for a storm they couldn't stop. Meanwhile, the contrast between her frantic defenses and Crockett's calm silence only widened the divide. Crockett continued her work, attending meetings, participating in community events, and offering no direct response beyond the steady reminder that all options were being considered. That restraint only fueled speculation. "She's choosing her moment," one analyst said, "and when she steps in, it's going to be decisive." By midnight, the commentary world was split into camps, those predicting Crockett would pursue legal action, those insisting the backlash would fade, and those urging Leavitt to make a sincere apology before things escalated further. But Leavitt pushed forward with louder denials, sharper defenses, and increasingly strained appearances. Her emotions shifted visibly. Bravado in the morning, worry by afternoon, and something closer to denial by nightfall. Yet no one expected what landed on Leavitt's desk the next morning, a legal notice with a number so massive it shook her to her core. Morning light filtered through the blinds in thin, unforgiving stripes when the envelope arrived at Karoline Leavitt's office, its edges crisp, its weight unmistakably heavy. No cameras were rolling, no reporters shouting her name, just the quiet thud of paperwork that carried enough force to stop her breath. Her assistant hesitated before sliding it across the table, as if aware that whatever lay inside would redraw the battlefield entirely. When Karoline unfolded the first page, the room seemed to shrink around her. There, in bold lettering, was the number she never imagined would appear beside her own name: $80 million. Across the city, Jasmine Crockett prepared for her statement with the composed precision of someone who understood the stakes not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, or demeaned. She didn't rehearse lines or practice theatrics. She simply reviewed the facts, the framing, and the values guiding her forward. The legal team surrounding her spoke in low, measured tones, but Jasmine's calm anchored the room. When she finally stepped up to the podium, the murmurs fell away. Cameras focused in, microphones leaned forward, and the world waited for the voice they had come to trust. "This is not about spectacle," Jasmine began, her tone steady as stone. "This is about respect, about responsibility, and about reminding people that the words spoken about public servants carry real consequences." There was no malice, no raised voice, no dramatic flourish. Yet each syllable landed with more weight than any shouted accusation ever could. Behind her, the stack of legal documents stood like a silent testament, outlining alleged harms, documented impact, and a call for accountability that resonated far beyond the specifics of this dispute. The statement was brief, almost disarmingly so, but its clarity reverberated instantly across communities. Within minutes, hashtags began rising like sparks on dry tinder. "Stand with Crockett" trended first, followed by "Words have weight" and "Accountability matters." Clips of Jasmine delivering her statement spread across platforms at astonishing speed. Commentators scrambled to react in real time, stumbling over their own shock. One pundit muttered, "This is unprecedented." Another stammered, "80 million? That's astronomical." Even those who typically downplayed political drama found themselves struggling to articulate the magnitude of the filing. The online world pulsed with intensity, and for the first time, supporters and skeptics alike paused long enough to consider the deeper implications unfolding before them in real time. Meanwhile, Karoline sat frozen in her office, eyes darting across the pages she'd already read 3 times but still couldn't fully process. The number alone felt surreal, almost detached from reality, yet the language surrounding it was precise, detailed, and unyielding. Her throat tightened as she whispered, "This can't be happening." She pushed the papers away, then pulled them back, as if hopping the text would rearrange itself into something less catastrophic. Anger flared, hot and instinctive. "This is political theater," she snapped to no one. But beneath the anger was something more fragile: fear creeping in unnoticed by the minute. As the news hit major networks, the narrative shifted from rumor to full-blown national spectacle. Panels lit up with analysts poring over the implications. "This isn't just symbolic," one expert said. "This filing is extensive." Another added, "The precision here is what stands out. It's meticulous." The contrast between Jasmine's composed announcement and Karoline's escalating distress became its own storyline. Commentators noted her clipped tone, her defensive posture, her inability to keep frustration from shaping every answer. "She's unraveling," someone observed during a live segment, capturing the moment with unnerving accuracy. Confusion turned to worry, then to dread for her. But the true thunderclap came when Jasmine's attorneys released a single highlighted line from the filing, a sentence that cut through every talking point circulating online. It read, "Public service demands accountability, and those who weaponize their platforms must answer for the impact they create." That one sentence ricocheted across the internet, appearing in captions, thumbnails, and headlines within minutes. People shared it not because it was harsh, but because it articulated what so many had been feeling for years: that the loudest voices often escaped responsibility while the most vulnerable bore the cost. Now, that imbalance was being challenged. Leavitt's response grew sharper as the pressure mounted. She released a late-night video insisting the case was ridiculous and a political stunt, but her forced composure cracked at the edges. Viewers noticed the flicker in her eyes, the tightness in her jaw, the hurried pace of her words. Reaction channels broke down her body language frame by frame. "She's scared," one analyst concluded. Another added, "This isn't confidence, this is survival mode." As the clip circulated, sympathy waned while scrutiny intensified. Every denial seemed to fuel more commentary, each attempt at control eroding what was left of her footing and stability. Meanwhile, Jasmine's team remained notably silent beyond the initial statement. Their restraint amplified the impact of the filing itself, allowing the public to fill in the gaps with anticipation and speculation. Even political operatives who usually dismissed progressive legal efforts began whispering, "This one might be different." News tickers updated hourly with developments. Editors raced to push new headlines. Podcasters devoted entire episodes to parsing legal possibilities. Across the country, people sensed a shift, an unmistakable feeling that old rules of unchecked rhetoric might finally be cracking. And at the center of it all, Jasmine stood steady and unwavering still. The crescendo arrived when Jasmine's spokesperson stepped before the press and delivered a single closing line that transformed the entire narrative. "Silence has protected the powerful for too long. Today, that silence ends." It was the mic drop moment commentators replayed for hours, the sentence that framed the lawsuit not as retribution, but as a turning point. Crowds audibly gasped when the clip aired. Even seasoned pundits blinked in stunned silence before scrambling to respond. The story had moved beyond the original remark. It had become a referendum on responsibility, on rhetoric, on the cost of using influence without care today. As the dust settled from the initial shock, one truth became undeniable. The ground beneath this conflict had shifted, and neither side could return to the echo chamber where it began. Supporters of Crockett celebrated the clarity and courage embodied in the filing, seeing it as a stand against years of unchecked commentary that dismissed lived realities. Critics struggled to craft coherent responses, caught between disbelief and the dawning realization that old tactics no longer worked. And through it all, anticipation built across screens and conversations, because the shockwaves didn't end with the legal filing, they were just beginning to spread. The moment Jasmine's lawsuit hit the public sphere, the reaction spread with the force of an earthquake, one of those deep, tectonic rumbles that doesn't just shake the surface, but shifts the entire landscape beneath people's feet. Twitter ignited first, timelines flooding with rapid-fire threads, screenshots of the legal filing, and emotional declarations from users who had been watching the feud unfold in real time. Within minutes, hashtags swarmed to the top of the trending list, carried by millions who felt a surge of vindication. Some wrote long reflections about accountability, others posted simple, explosive reactions like, "Wow." But the sentiment was unmistakable. Something monumental had just happened. TikTok followed seconds behind. Creators stitched the clip of Jasmine's calm announcement with their own reactions, eyes widening, jaws dropping, hands flying to faces. One popular creator replayed the line, "Silence has protected the powerful for too long," and added only a whisper, "This is historic." Another broke down the legal filing point by point, explaining why this moment felt bigger than a feud and bigger than politics itself. The video racked up 1 million views in under an hour, with comments ranging from "She's iconic" to "This is what leadership looks like." Each stitch seemed to crystallize the divide between spectacle and substance in a way everyone could feel. On YouTube, full-length analysis videos appeared as if summoned by the collective energy of the moment. Thumbnails shouted in bold letters 80 million DOLLARS, while creators tried to keep pace with an audience hungry for updates. Some political commentators opened their videos with a knowing smirk, saying things like, "I warned y'all," or "We saw this coming," while others admitted they were stunned by the scale of the suit. By midday, dozens of channels had posted breakdowns, reaction panels, and timeline recaps, each attempting to capture the magnitude of Crockett's move. Viewers filled the comments with applause emojis, heart emojis, and paragraphs about how deeply the moment resonated. Then came the memes. They arrived fast, hit hard, and spread everywhere. One viral image depicted Jasmine as a serene warrior surrounded by swirling chaos. Another showed a shocked Karoline clutching the legal papers against a backdrop of exaggerated lightning bolts. Another meme simply read, 80 million reasons to think before you speak. People shared them not just because they were funny, but because they symbolized a shift, an emotional release for those long accustomed to seeing dignity dismissed. The memes made their way across languages, across continents, across communities that recognized the universal tension between harm and accountability. Celebrities soon joined the wave. A Grammy-winning singer tweeted, "Respect and dignity always win," and her message was retweeted more than 500,000 times. A famous actor posted an Instagram story saying, "Leaders like Jasmine remind us why truth matters." A best-selling author wrote a thread connecting the moment to larger cultural patterns, gathering millions of views. Even international outlets reported on the story, framing it as an American reckoning, an example of how political rhetoric can reach a breaking point. For hours, it felt like the world had paused to watch, breath held collectively. But while Crockett's supporters poured out in full force, Leavitt found herself facing a wave of backlash that grew louder with each passing moment. Her defenders remained vocal, but they were increasingly outnumbered by those questioning her choices, her tone, and her response. Clips of her late-night denial videos circulated as evidence of unraveling composure. Analysts picked apart her statements, comparing them to her reaction the morning before and pointing out how dramatically her demeanor had shifted. Screenshots of her comments were juxtaposed with Crockett's calm presence, the contrast amplified with every share. Inside Leavitt's camp, the panic was palpable. Staffers scrambled to draft statements that didn't sound like panic, rehearsing phrases like, "We will fight this," and politically motivated, while knowing each word would be scrutinized. Behind closed doors, voices rose and fell in tense bursts, strategies shifted by the minute, and phones buzzed nonstop with messages from political allies suddenly not so eager to associate themselves with the controversy. One aide reportedly muttered, "We're losing control of the story," and although few in the room admitted it aloud, the sentiment hung heavy in the air. Karoline herself oscillated between disbelief and despair. She watched the trending hashtags from her phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through reactions she couldn't bring herself to read fully. Anger sparked, then sputtered. Fear rose, then tightened into something more brittle. Each new headline, each new meme, each new analysis chipped away at her defenses. She began packing hallways during breaks, rehearsing responses she abandoned halfway through, insisting to her team, "It's exaggerated, it has to be exaggerated." But the doubt in her voice deepened with each repetition. As the day unfolded into evening and evening into night, the pressure closed in from all sides. The media cycle had become relentless, the public commentary relentless, and the comparisons to Crockett's composed strength even more relentless still. Everything built toward the inevitable moment, the moment outside the courthouse, captured in chilling detail when she finally stepped into the cold air and the flashing lights, the emotional unraveling written across her face in full, unfiltered honesty. But beyond all the drama and all the noise, something deeper was happening underneath the surface. In the days that followed, as the chaos slowly began to settle, something unexpected rose from the noise, a clarity that felt almost like a collective exhale. The spectacle faded, the shouting softened, and the nation found itself staring not at the conflict, but at the truth beneath it. What had begun as a political feud had evolved into a cultural reflection, a moment that forced people to ask what kind of discourse they wanted shaping their futures. And in that quieter space, Jasmine Crockett's calm resilience emerged not just as a counterpoint to the drama, but as the heart of a larger lesson about dignity in public life. Crockett became, for many, a symbol of what leadership could look like when it wasn't molded by rage or fueled by spectacle. Her measured voice, her unwavering composure, her refusal to meet disrespect with more disrespect, all of it, painted a portrait of someone who understood that power isn't found in volume, but in intention. She hadn't responded with insult or theatrics. She responded with clarity, principle, and faith in the systems designed to protect people's humanity. That choice resonated deeply with audiences who had grown weary of the non-stop barrage of conflict. They saw in her a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stands quietly, unshaken. Across communities, discussions shifted from who won to what this revealed. People reflected on how quickly public discourse can cross lines, how easily identities become targets rather than stories, how the rush to generate headlines can drown out the responsibility to uplift truth. Teachers brought the moment into classrooms to talk about rhetoric and accountability. Community leaders used it to open conversations about representation and why it matters who speaks, who listens, and who is allowed to stand tall without being diminished. Families talked about it around dinner tables, not just the lawsuit, but the idea that words carry weight, that harm has consequences, and that dignity is not optional in a society striving toward justice. It became clear that political feuds aren't just clashes between individuals. They are mirrors reflecting deeper societal divides. But they also reveal hopes for fairness, for equity, for leaders who refuse to exploit identity for outrage. Crockett's response illuminated those hopes with rare clarity. She reminded people that identity isn't a weakness to weaponize, it's a story to honor. Representation isn't a threat to power, it's an expansion of it. And accountability isn't retribution. It's how communities protect one another when public narratives slide too far into harm. But beyond the political and cultural analysis, the moment stirred something emotional in those who followed it closely. People who had felt unseen or unheard watched a woman step forward not to shout but to stand, and in that simple posture they recognized themselves. They recognized their parents, their grandparents, their children. They saw generations of people told to lower their voices, learning, finally, that they didn't have to. Crockett didn't preach that message, she embodied it. And in doing so, she left behind an imprint of hope in a time when hope often feels in short supply. As the news cycle moved on and the intensity dimmed, what lingered wasn't the lawsuit or the controversy, but the reminder that respect outlasts rage. Rage burns fast and bright, drawing crowds and cameras. But respect, quiet, steady, unwavering, moves differently. It roots itself in communities, reshapes narratives, and builds a future where truth has room to stand. And even those who never said it out loud felt something shift inside them, an understanding that dignity might just be the most powerful force in the room. Because in the end, the real power isn't in shouting the loudest, it's in standing your ground with dignity. And so we return to the moment that started it all, the courthouse steps, the flashing lights, the breathless headline that echoed across the country. Karoline Leavitt breaking down under the weight of an $80 million lawsuit wasn't just a political shockwave. It was a reminder of how powerful a single moment can become when words cross lines that should never be crossed. But more importantly, it was a reminder of what rises in the aftermath. A call for dignity, for accountability, for truth spoken not in anger but in unwavering clarity. This wasn't just a story about conflict. It was a story about who we choose to be in the face of conflict. A story about how the calmest voice in the room can shift the entire direction of a culture. A story about what happens when a woman who has spent her life standing up for others decides to stand up for herself, and in doing so, stands up for all of us. If stories like this matter to you, stories where courage outshines chaos, where dignity refuses to bow, where justice echoes louder than insults, then make your voice part of the conversation. If accountability, truth, and the protection of every person's identity are values you stand for, let this be the moment you lean in rather than look away. Share your thoughts, share this story. Share the message that respect is not optional in the world we're building together. Because when we amplify moments of integrity, we shape the kind of future that finally feels worthy of the people fighting for it. The lights may have dimmed on this chapter, but the movement behind it is only growing. The story isn't over, and neither are we.